The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250.
Welcome to Dr. Cashman's Mind, Body, Spirit show. Today's talk will be about harming and killing our children. That seems pretty serious business, but I'm looking at this from what is actually happening in how to identify it and how to prevent it. A very important subject, because all of us love our children and we don't want to harm our children, obviously, but some do, probably largely unintentionally, although there have been children which become battered, and there's some probably subconscious, at least, intention in doing it. A very complex and serious subject. When you go back in history, when you go back hundreds of years, maybe even 1,000 years, children were seriously abused. Yeah, if you read the history of it. I published this book called Harming and Killing Our Children here. If you want to read it, it's on Amazon. It's on Amazon. It even has a code of behavior at the second half of it, so something you could teach the children, I think pretty important. So in history, they even made slaves out of the children. Yeah, they even made indentured servants out of the children. It wasn't until the turn of the last century that children developed their rights. Some religions even didn't consider them to be a person till they were baptized. Mm-hmm. If they died before baptism, they were treated almost like an animal, were buried like that. Yeah, it's a very complex, unpleasant history. I have a 2 or 3 page story about that, and it's so unpleasant you really wouldn't want to hear it. But let's talk about the present time a bit. For one thing, we've learned a lot more through science since that time. And an interesting thing is that when a child is born, maybe only 10% of its genetic code has been expressed. Remember, the genes run the processes of your body and the size of your brain, whether you got arms or legs, or so gene messaging is extremely important. And they've determined now that our DNA, which runs really the machinery of our body, and then the genes get the job done. Okay, we get 30,000 genes. Okay, that the genetics of the mother and father, and maybe even a generation back or two, influence the DNA genetic structure of the infant. Mm-hmm. So what habits they had, whether they drank or smoked or exercised or what kind of illnesses they had, can exert some expression on the infant. And then, that's because the end of the DNA, end of the chromosomes, we have something called telomeres. That's relatively new, this information. And the telomeres can be altered by activities that occur when the infant is in the uterus or the child themselves for a year or two, and a little bit thereafter can affect their own DNA through these telomeres. So if mother and father were smokers and drinkers and never exercised and ate the wrong food, will affect the genetic structure of the infant. But what the mother does, though, during the pregnancy has even a bigger influence, because it can change the genetic structure of the infant. Remember I said maybe only about 10% of the DNA is developed. 90% is a genetic script written by the mother's activities. And when the child is born, what type of milk they're drinking, whether it's milk from a cow or mother's milk, for example, will affect the genetic structure. And we will review all that. In a way, you say, well, that's bad news, but it's good news too, that through the habits of the mother and things they teach the infant to do and what kind of food they give the infant can result in a very healthy child. But there are a number of very serious syndromes which I'm going to review with you today. For example, fetal, infant, alcohol syndrome. If the mother is drinking a lot of alcohol, of course that would be in her blood, and the blood will, through the umbilicus, will connect to the infant, and alcohol is toxic to the brain. It destroys brain cells big time. As a neurosurgeon, now I'm the wellness doctor, but as a neurosurgeon, I saw a lot of people with blood clots in their head from alcoholism. They barely bump their head. Yeah, and what happens? Alcohol is toxic to the brain, and the brain shrinks. I bet I saw alcoholics over the years whose brain was that far off the skull. That far off the skull. You take the clot out, and the clots usually would have already been dissolved, but it would be dark blood, for example. You could just make a hole here and a hole there, and it would drain out. And the brain would come up a little bit, but then there'd be a lot of space there. Yeah, and the brain would never come back up. Would never come back up. So alcohol is destructive to the brain. Some people can get over their alcoholism, but the brain never returns to normal. And I saw many cases of this. So if the mother is drinking, in that all children are affected, okay, but many are affected. Maybe 80% of the children are affected. And when they're born, they have a characteristic syndrome. For one thing, that children are very irritable, many times underweight, occasionally way overweight, and this genetic destruction, which we're talking about, will affect their appearance. Some have very small heads, microcephaly, and they will be impaired all their life. Many of them have abnormal facial structures. Yeah, there'd be an unsymmetrical face, for example, or blind in one eye, or the tongue is deviated, or the jaw is deviated. They have a typical facial appearance, something you always, when you see an infant like that, you wonder, was a mother alcoholic or drinking a lot. Occasionally it goes back a couple of generations too. A very serious problem. And there are a number of names they have for these conditions. Fetal alcohol syndrome, FAS, partial fetal alcohol syndrome, PFAS, alcohol-related neurodevelopment disorders, ARND, alcohol-related birth defects. There can be other defects in the body. So alcohol can have a tremendous effect in the infant, and as they grow up, they could have a lifetime of disability. They may need to live in an institution. They may have seizures. They may be paralyzed. They may be not very attractive. And the most common birth defect is fetal alcohol syndrome. That's the most common because a significant number of people are drinking. They don't think it'll cause any problems to anybody. First of all, it causes problems to the person who's drinking a lot. And they used to think drinking 1 glass of wine a day, well, that's okay. Well, they now have found, latest studies show, any amount of alcohol is destructive to the brain. Mm-hmm. Any amount. Yeah. I used to think 3 glasses of wine a week were fine, but it really isn't. So prevention is a big deal. For one thing, besides the child having a problem, the child is more likely to be in drugs or cigarettes or drink alcohol themselves. It can lead to a life of addiction, something you wouldn't wish on anybody. So I think becoming pregnant, for example, and being in a fraternity party and having a lot of alcohol on board and have taken no precautions or even doing something in the first place can result in a very serious problem for a child. So let's keep that in mind, especially college students who are exposed to these fraternity parties where they're just frankly drinking too much. I know I lived in a fraternity and I hear things have not changed a great deal. So if you, think about it. If your parents could be alcoholics, if your parents are drinking a lot and don't think much about it, mother or father or both, well, what do you think the children are probably going to do? So you have to really think about it because you can affect many generations. If that person is drinking a lot, more likely to be in an accident, more likely to kill somebody accidentally, or if there's a gun in the home, to use a gun when you normally wouldn't because you're not thinking straight. So something in some societies, like I was reading a book from England, and it spoke like in Scotland. In spite of this knowledge being out there, almost everybody drinks. Mm-hmm. So as a result, they are having more problems. The next problem I'd like to talk about is called SIDS, S-I-D-S, SIDS, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. This is the most common cause of death in the first year of life, the first 12 months of life, most common. And of course, extremely stressful to the family, and of course, the infant that died. And the most important thing to talk about is not to place the infant on their belly. Your doctor, your pediatrician should tell you about that, or you could Google SIDS and read about it a little bit so that you learn. Certainly, parents who consume drugs or alcohol are a little more careless, and they're not paying attention to what they're doing with a child who's crying, and they put them in bed and they put them on their belly, and at 4 in the morning they go check on them, and the kid's dead. It happens. Horrible situation. So learn something about it. Maybe Google it, SIDS, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. Your doctor should teach you about it, but the internet is so full of information, you could learn it there, okay? And again, it's the most common cause of death. Someone under age 1, certainly a horrible thing where prevention really is the biggest thing. And they'll even talk about type of cribs and type of blankets and all these things. You need to learn something about that in more detail. The next one let's talk about is neonatal abstinence syndrome, NAS. And that is a syndrome related to use of narcotics, because there's many different ones. But if mother and father, remember what happens before fertilization can even affect the child, okay? But now the child, say, fertilization is taking place, and the child is and is a pregnant mother, and if the mother is using drugs, and there may be different things, different type of drugs, of course, and many mothers who use drugs, whether it be codeine or heroin, or effects can be a bit different. But what's interesting, most mothers using these things, and they do it because they're stressed. It is a common reason. But many of them also smoke, many of them also drink alcohol, many of them just don't care, and everything goes through the umbilicus to the infant, and the infant is taking the effect. Most of these narcotics affect the neurotransmitters of the brain, where the messages come from the axon and between the dendrite. We have 100 billion brain cells, hopefully, but trillions of neurotransmitters, they jump from the axon to the dendrite, and narcotics interfere with that. They occupy these receptors, and the messages don't get there, and the person usually using drugs because they just don't feel good. They become addicted to them. So obviously the answer is don't start in the first place. Find out other ways to feel good. Alcohol, cigarettes, narcotics, gambling, many different things we use to make ourselves feel good. And we become physically addicted, but the one that's more difficult to deal with is the mental addiction. That's where the neurotransmitters in our brain have changed. We light a cigarette that releases dopamine, a very small nucleus in the brain releases these molecules, dopamine, and I'm in heaven. Trouble is, when you're smoking, that effect is over quickly, and a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes, maybe sooner, you got to light up again. And narcotics may last a little bit longer. Cocaine, I think, an hour and a half or so. Different ones have longer effects, but what you're taking in will affect the infant too. And the infant, when born, may be underweight, may be very spastic, very stiff, may way under normal weight, 3 pounds or something, and may die or need to be a tube in the throat. Average price hospitalization for someone with NAS, about $70,000, $100,000, versus a normal birth in there 2 days. That's still a few thousand, but it's heck of a lot less. And the child may need to detox, may just like a drug addict, and may need to get the medicine, the medications, and the neurotransmitters need to change. In the end, you may not have a normal child. You may have a disabled child in the end, and they'll be disabled all their life. They're more likely to smoke, be alcoholic, more likely to be a drug addict, more likely to be slow mentally, cognitive impairment, physical impairment. But it's not totally hopeless. There are a few which are perfectly normal, maybe 15% or so, but the majority, there's something wrong. So things we want to avoid: FAS, the alcohol problem; NAS, the abstinence problem. So using drugs or drinking for mother can result in an abnormal child, live in an institution, maybe be retarded, maybe disabled, and you, the mother, are responsible. So, and once addicted, if a mother is addicted, it's tough to get rid of. Mm-hmm. So now you got a child that's been damaged, and you're an addicted mother. You can see that life is not going to be very good. Next, let's talk about damaging our child's brains with sports and child abuse. There are indeed family situations, and it's not that uncommon. Fortunately, we have laws now. If you abuse your child, like you choke them or bang their head, the welfare department, the health department may come in, take your child away that day. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, if you see it in a family, by law, you have to report that. If you don't, you could have a problem with the law. And I saw it many times. Having been a neurosurgeon, now I'm a wellness doctor, but I was a neurosurgeon many years. I saw it many times. I saw the police walk in while I'm talking to the mother, and there's a child 2 or 3 years old, and the police walk in and with the welfare department take the child away. The mother will never see that infant again. They may loosen up a little bit, but I've seen them 3 or 4. They'll take every child out of the house. You get 4 or 5 kids, and you abuse one of them, they'll take all of them. Can you imagine the trauma on the children? Okay, and yourself, and the loved ones who love the children. So child abuse, which and obviously I could name 1,000 different ways people do that, and it's so horrible. I hate to repeat it. I mean, every instrument, every way from choking to hitting them to whatever, it's been done in history. How anyone could do that to a child, I don't know. I myself, where am I coming from? I couldn't kill a mouse. So how do you think I would feel about children or animals? I mean, I hug them, I love them, I kiss them. I think children, you would think, are even closer. But I respect all life. If you respect all life, you won't abuse your children. So we spoke about child abuse as being extremely serious. Any abuse, they'll take your kid. That's horrible on the child, and it'd be horrible on you. And if you see it, you gotta report it. Okay. Some people, it's a shaking baby syndrome. That can be fatal, incidentally. and also that take away the kid if they live. And I've seen children be disabled from that, had to live in a nursing home the rest of their life because they weren't breathing right and had a tube in, they could never take the tube out. I've seen all that. And so what about sport activities, for example? Well, this is a bit controversial and difficult. Let me give myself for an example. When I was a child, I fell once on the ice while ice skating. They didn't catch it, and I was at high school, Concordia High School, Bronxville, New York, and I walked up the stairs to my room and fell down the stairs again, and then had to be hospitalized for 2 or 3 days in Bronxville, New York, many years ago, because I hit my head. Another time, I was at a summer camp, a recreational camp in New Jersey, having lived in New York City, and a kid said, could I borrow the bat? He wanted to swing the bat, and he didn't. I didn't walk away far enough. He swung the bat, knocked me out, broke my skull. Was in the hospital 2 days. Yeah, that happened to me, just routine life. So was that risky behavior? I don't know. I mean, the boy, of course, shouldn't have swung the bat. But things that happen, okay? But if you have a number of concussions, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it'll have permanent effects. Doesn't appear to me that, here I am, 39 for the 44th time, and brain seems to be okay. But the other people who, by this time, could be in severe dementia because of the number of injuries. Look at football injuries, for example. These professional football players, and if you've been reading about that, they've now proven that causes some brain damage getting hit that many times. But what I observed, though, which no one else is paying attention to, most of these football players also gained a lot of weight, and now they're diabetics, and diabetes causes memory loss. That's not brought up, okay? That could be part of it, but certainly a significant part of it, to the point that the increased rate of dementia and Alzheimer's disease in professional football players is quite high. And many, that is, they've now have a bunch of money in a fund, and they're all suing to get the money. Some may even be faking memory loss. And a lot of times the memory loss may be from the diabetes and Alzheimer's disease and not the injuries. Hard to say. Someone did a study, too, though, on soccer players. They hit the ball. And the reason, and they found some significance there. Retired professional soccer players, they found increased rates of memory problems. So would I let my kid play soccer and use the head? I say no. Okay, I mean, it's up to you. They can play tennis and they can play golf. They don't necessarily need to play soccer. But something to look up a little bit before you let your kid play soccer. Believe it or not, I even played football, 130 pounds for a little while, 6 weeks. Fortunately, I got kicked off the team. So my classmates didn't look down on me because I got kicked off that team. 130 pounds, I should not have been playing it. Those guys were too big for me. So sports can do it. It can cause serious, and your head doesn't even need to be hit. And I'll tell you why. I saw a patient once that had major hemorrhages throughout the brain, a girl maybe 18, 19 years old, and there was blood everywhere. And I thought, clearly, no head injury. I thought maybe a ruptured aneurysm. Then an angiogram, no aneurysm. Then I looked at the pattern of the blood, and I realized it was a pattern of a head injury. You know what happened? She had been skiing that Saturday on one ski, and she was an expert at it, and she was just like a centrifuge going around and around and around all day long. And guess what? This 3-pound brain is made out of fat, and the solid skull was starting to rotate at different speeds. Makes perfect sense, and tore blood vessels. That was her problem. Yeah, so just rotational forces can cause injuries to the brain too without anything hitting them. Isn't that an interesting case? Yeah, I was proud of myself for coming up with a diagnosis. So when you let your, between ages 15 and 24, concussion is the cause of the most of the injuries to a child. Interesting. But almost all sports can have some effect. Even, let's face it, extreme dancing, if you take a fall, going to hit your head. Okay? They call this cognitive traumatic impairment, CTI. Very complex story. We can spend hours on it. So if you're signing a form to let your kid play a sport, think about that, because my mother signed the form to let me play football, 130 pounds, and I'm playing football. Guys hitting me, they weigh 250 pounds. But I did, I'm here, so, okay. There's some risk to life, let's face it. But this rotational injury is kind of interesting. Here's the next one, which is extremely common and probably causes most of the chronic illnesses, diseases that we see. Generally, they don't occur like that. It takes time. There's harming and killing our children with fast food. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. If you can get it and eat it, it will get into your fat cells very fast. That's why it's called fast food. What industry is figured out, there's not much money to be made in giving you the real food. Foods of color, for example, which are very healthy. They don't make a lot of money doing that. But if they can strip the bran and the germ, that's the reproductive part, off the food, that would make it fast food, okay? Then they add flavorings and toxins and artificial colors, preservatives, pesticides, foaming agents, emulsifiers, stabilizers to make it taste good and look good. But what you're eating is frankenfood. You're not eating real food. You know, you won't believe this one. I have a woodchuck living under my house, 13 years now. He smiles at me with his little teeth, okay? And I feed him every day. He's not destroyed my house, okay? Remember, I can't kill anything. So one time, I was accidentally given a bag of chicken McNuggets, okay? And I don't eat them, so I gave it to him. He wouldn't eat it. Well, turned to find out he's a vegetarian, okay? I didn't know it till then. But then, for 2 weeks, they're laying there. Nobody's eating them. Nobody's eating them. And I finally figured out why. It's so full of fake foods, chemicals, flavorings. These animals knew that's junk food. They never ate it. I had to throw it in the garbage. 2 weeks I let it lay out there. But this is what most of America is eating. And for the last 50 years or so, America has been going like this because they're eating sugary, processed foods. And when you go like this, 80% chance you become a diabetic, you're going to get 30 different diseases: high blood pressure, heart attack, strokes, increased rates of cancer, die 20 years too young, maybe have 25, 30 years of disability, amputated legs, blindness, sudden heart attacks, strokes, all related to eating fake foods, okay? So what you feed your child, you got to be very careful, because remember we spoke about addiction. A lot of people think sugar is more addictive than cocaine. I debated that once on one of these shows here. And I think she won the debate. Yeah, she thought sugar is more addictive. And she worked on the side for Dr. Furman, one of the world's experts and a friend of mine in nutrition. So what you're feeding your kids, if you're feeding them sugary foods all day, donuts and ice cream, and they become addicted to the sugar, and as they become teenagers, and they'll get overweight, they'll run the wrong blood test and not find out they're diabetic, because people, they do the HbA1c, which is late into diabetes. If they ran serum insulins, they know they're diabetic. Lose 15 pounds and it's gone. Live to be 100. That's not what is occurring in society today. And we like sugary products, a cookie or a donut or a soda pop. Quick fix. We feel good in a minute because this releases dopamine, the feel-good hormone, and I'm in heaven. Let's have another donut. This is how you can harm your children. And about 40% in certain ethnic groups of their kids are obese. 40%. And they're all going to die 20 years too young, and maybe sooner. Many will become disabled. If you see a person with an extremity amputated, odds are they were either a smoker or a sugar eater. Mm-hmm. Those diseases cause that, so most illnesses can be prevented, okay? So, of course, fast food restaurants are the ones most likely to sell you the food that's been stripped of the nutrients. Avoid fast food restaurants. You can learn to cook good food quickly. Yes, you can. You can fix most things in 10 minutes. You're just going to have to do a little reading or look at my website where there's some cooking classes. You can go to YouTube, Rudy Cashman, Live to be 100. There, a lot of information. At the Three Rivers Pharmacy, I see people are free for Friday. I also have now one sheet that you can get a barcode from, which leads to maybe 500 YouTube shows, Rudy Cashman, Facebook pages, which explain to you proper nutrition. Mm-hmm. Recently, I had a one-page ad in the Ink Spot, a newspaper in Fort Wayne. The barcode's on there too. Every 2 weeks the paper comes out. I'll have a full page all on health. That'd be another place you could. So the kind of food you would recommend is foods of color. You can add mushrooms and onions full of nutrients. You want food full of vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. And there's mathematics in nature. Oh, yeah. Fibonacci numbers. So if you eat nature that looks good, symmetrical, fresh, colorful, you will become the same way. I have examples of it. It's in some of my PowerPoints where people who didn't look healthy at all, frankly, not real good, who, when they get done eating right, look like movie stars. I have proof through photography of that. So that's good news, okay? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, I remember at IU in college, I didn't want to date this girl who wanted to date me, who didn't look very attractive. Well, she got even with me. She started eating good, exercising good, and then she looked like a movie star, and then she wouldn't go out with me. That happened to me. Okay, so we got to put a little humor in there, okay? And so eating fast food is suicide on the installment plan. Teach your child to eat right, okay? And you're the one that's teaching the child to eat. And a lot of the government foods that the government provides are unhealthy. Yeah. And the reason kids like the fast food because they're quick fix. It's dopamine, serotonin makes us feel good. First they become dependent on it, then tolerance, where they gotta eat it, gotta eat it, and the commercial people, that make the products, the pharmaceutical companies, and the government, who get money from the sugar industry, have figured out that the bliss point, that the most amount of sugar in something is higher for children than adults. Yeah, it's around 36% versus about 18% amount of sugar you can put in a food. So without you revolting, it's too sweet or too salty or it's too fat. There's an institute, the Millell Institute in Philadelphia. They know the bliss point of food, and they sell that information to industry. It's all about the money, okay? And so giving children soda pop, which is 50% of overweight problem, donuts, it's like giving them alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, like narcotics. Mm-hmm. Sugar is more addictive than cocaine, okay? While we're on this subject, let's speak a minute about the sugar kiss, okay? Sugar is the ultimate frankenfood, okay? Fructose corn syrup, which is sugar made from corn, which the government supports with money. That's not nice. They give a lot of money to farmers for growing corn, but you can make fructose corn syrup out of that. The Japanese invented the enzyme that makes that. It's sweeter than regular sugar. It's more addictive, sweeter, and costs less. So fast food industry figured that out quick enough, so they put fructose corn syrup in everything. Also, it's a good preservative. Yeah, and that's what I think with my chicken McNuggets. They never rotted. When I looked at them 2 weeks later, they were not rotted. And I'm certain that these chicken McNuggets were wrapped in fructose. That was the outside. I'll bet you anything. And fructose corn syrup is half glucose, so you use it up, it goes to glycogen. The other half goes to the liver, it makes fatty liver, which results in a lot of diseases, about 30 chronic diseases, including Alzheimer's disease, dementia, blindness, heart attacks, strokes, amputations, dislocations, liver transplant, renal transplant, all can be avoided by eating the right food. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And let's go to the next subject. We could talk on any subject for days. Look at my YouTube shows. Rudy Cashman, YouTube, Rudy Cashman, I'll pop up 500 of them, okay? Our children are going to pot. Very high rate, especially with the e-cigarettes coming along, of children that are addicted to marijuana. Mm-hmm. It's over 25%. Some people think 40%. Mm-hmm. And marijuana affects the developing brain. They have shown through functional MRI scans now that they find holes in the brains of children who've been smoking marijuana. Mm-hmm. I saw them. I have seen them. And what it does, it takes a brilliant child, maybe converts it to an average child to maybe a slow or retarded child. That's in the medical literature. And when you think now about close to 30% of the kids with the e-cigarettes, and our state approved the e-cigarettes, they just kind of limit the age, and nobody's paying attention to that. They had a chance to increase the tax on cigarettes, and through the elasticity of demand, you increase the tax 10%, 4% less use it. That sometimes that's the only way you can decrease the use, because you're increasing the tax. So the state should have raised their tax. Mm-hmm. They didn't. I know a senator who was head of it, had the chance to do that, to increase their tax, to increase the age and the availability. He did none of that and left office. Mm-hmm. He should be proud of himself. He's killing a lot of kids and some adults too, because in our state, eventually, I think, will probably legalize marijuana. I reviewed the statistics in Colorado where they'd have, and they thought they were collecting a lot of money in taxes. But come to find out, they had to spend a lot more in health care. And illegal sales came into the state because when people sell it illegally, you're not paying the tax. That's exactly what's happening. So criminal activity actually has increased. And if kids smoke marijuana, they're much more likely to smoke cigarettes, use alcohol, and a significant number develop something called the munchies, a pot belly. You want to look beautiful with a pot belly? Well, smoke marijuana, it happens, okay? And they have higher rates of pregnancy because they're thinking right when they're smoking marijuana. I'm in heaven, I can do anything I want to, okay? And then develop the munchies, and they're more involved in accidents and more likely to lose their job, more likely not to graduate. So a lot of complications. So we want to speak to kids about this, but it's a problem. The parents are using it, okay? Well, the parents aren't using it, but if you see your child's behavior changing, when it's a brilliant child and now isn't going to school, and you're finding cigarettes in the room, start thinking about addictions, and not just cigarettes. Think of alcohol, think of narcotics, think especially of marijuana. William Bennett, who used to be head of the FDA, I think, the G.W. Bush or somewhere along that line, wrote a great book, How to Raise a Drug-Free Child. That's also a Joseph Califano, also wrote a great book, How to Raise a Drug Kid, Straight Dope for Parents. I think this is a good book to read. I think every parent should read that, and because you get a few kids, there always can be one or all of them having problems, and once they are addicted, that what I was saying is most drug addiction started with marijuana. 80%. I read that in one of these books. 80% started with marijuana, so it's on the path to worsening problems. And kids who smoke marijuana, their IQ is less, and there's about 700 other chemicals in marijuana which are going to affect your body, and the liver has to detoxify those. That's a lot of work for the liver, so a lot of effects on the body. And now let's take a minute, a subject you may not want to hear, but I've read the book, and the name of the book to look at, I don't have it with me here, is by Joe Keon, Whitewash. It's about milk. Joe Keon, Whitewash. You read that, I doubt you'll drink milk again. Industry has promoted milk as a very positive thing, and they pay a lot of money to the congressman, so the government did too. But the story of milk, that was the last day, and I've read Joe Keon's book probably 5 times and knew about it maybe 15 years ago, okay? And that cow's milk, there are 5,400 mammals, okay? Okay, 5,400 mammals. But every mammal, the amount of carbohydrate, the amount of protein, the amount of fat is different in every one of them. Matter of fact, every veterinarian knows you don't give the milk of one animal to an animal of another species in the next cage, you lose your job if you did that, because that odds are that animal will die that day. We survive a little longer than that. That day. Veterinarians would tell you that. Talk to one sometime. Very interesting. Okay? The proteins are different. That determines your growth rate. You give mouse milk to a mouse, double its size 1 week. So everyone is a different elephant. I'd take it 2 years. Okay? And what do they do with the cow? They raise it in grass where they've placed a lot of chemicals, pesticides, okay? And then they put the cow in a cage, because they found out if they put that cow in a cage and milk it by a machine, they can increase 10 times the amount of milk they produce. So they give the cow growth hormones of other animals. So the cow grows bigger, and its mammary glands grows bigger, increase production about 10 times. And then you're going to give the milk to your kid. I mean, you're kidding. There are many other hormones in there which they added to give the cow to make it produce more. 7 hypothalamic hormones, 6 thyroid hormones, all things that affect your hormones. We have 50 hormones in our body. What if we increase them? You're going to give them to yourself or to a kid. What do you think is going to happen? Periods might start at age 11, but you give them all these growth hormones and thyroid hormones, and the most metabolism in your body comes. The messages start in the hypothalamus. You give them those kind of hormones. They're going to start having their periods when they're 7, 8 years old, and they do, and some even become pregnant because you're giving them the hormones. And they're also in milk. It's been studied, and a guy named Colin Campbell from Cornell University studied the proteins in milk. It's called casein, and he found that is the most carcinogenic, cancer-causing, most carcinogenic chemical in the world. So when mothers are giving their kids a lot of milk, increased rates of breast cancer down the line. Cancers don't occur necessarily the next day. A lot of breast cancer is related to being overweight and milk. It's been proven scientifically, yet you don't hear medicine particularly talking about it. They're all doing this genetic research in Indianapolis, sending a lot of money down there, but it takes 32 genes to, what are you going to give, 32 drugs for breast cancer, when just by proper diet, eating, not giving the milk, you could reduce it 50%. I can show you the literature. And you might say, well, 2% milk is only 2% fat. No, it's 35% fat. So you can gain weight from it. I don't drink anymore. I switched to almond milk and pea milk, and now I find I don't even need that, so I just eat the nuts. But you can get some protein from milk. You say, well, I need my calcium. Turns out that's a fraud too. That's a fraud too. A better way to get calcium is from the vegetables that you eat. Yeah, that's a better way to get it. Industry threw that at you so they can sell all kind of supplements, and they make you drink milk, when in reality you do not need to drink milk to get the calcium that you need. That is scientifically proven. It's in the literature. What is important is to drink mother's milk. Mother's milk is totally different. Remember what I said? milk from cows is meant for baby cows, the right proteins, the right carbohydrates, the right fats. Our brain is made mainly from fat, omega-3 fats, the good fats, okay? And when a child drinks the milk from their own mother, that's mainly omega-3 fats, and that will build the biggest brain a child can have. A mother that breastfeeds a child for 2 years will give that child the biggest brain, the best brain they can have. Mm-hmm. Different associations now would say, well, 6 months is good enough. Well, it's not totally good enough, but that's what's being tolerated today. Matter of fact, mothers who get a C-section, their child never passed through the vagina, where the child's face would have been painted with microbes, which we need, lactobacillus, which we need to metabolize milk that you drink. The ones that never had that, they are missing the bacteria in their gut that metabolizes milk. But mother's milk is totally consistent with the normal functioning of our gut. So breastfeeding 2 years, so much healthier and for the best brain your child can get. Also, when you're drinking the milk of the mother, you're less likely to have allergies, decrease asthma, decrease ear infection, and animal milk also causes acne. I drank a lot of milk when I was a child. I had acne all the time. My dad had it down in New York, and I never knew. They never mentioned it, but finally I stopped drinking milk, my acne cleared right up. So that's also one of the side effects. So I think we've gone through the main things that we've been doing to our children. I encourage you to read this book, Harming and Killing Our Children, because I have it in much more detail. In the second half of the book, I put 20 prescriptions to lead a good life, 20 suggestions and you can post these in a room or in the refrigerator, that lead to a good life for your children. Read a book regularly, respect the environment, respect teachers, police, etc. A behavioral code. There's even a song in back. So that's the other half of the book. I don't have time for that today, but that came out of a book I originally wrote years ago called The Call of Life. But the other half of that book, so we tell you about the illnesses, and then proper nutrition, and then about proper behavior. I think this, because it's about nutrition and not smoking, and it's a real good code of behavior you can teach to a kid. I wanted them to post it in the schools, but they refused because they have a lot of problems with the kids, and maybe they wouldn't have them health-wise, behavior-wise. But anyway, thanks for listening, and maybe do a little bit of reading, and this information I think will perhaps help you raise your kids. And if you need more information, I'm at the Three Rivers Pharmacy every Friday. A lady speak to you for free, and we had this program and other programs which I do because I love you. I care about you. And look at YouTube, Rudy Cashman, and you'll stay busy. You'll stay busy. And I do this because I love you. Thanks so much for watching.
Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne. Learn more under the Explore tab at acpl.info.